Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you aboard the Airport Adventures, Flight 926-2020, from Philly to wherever you want to go. All carry-on items should be now stowed securely in an overhead bin or under the seat in front of you. All aisles and exitways should be clear. All electronic devices should be off or on airplane mode. As we leave the gate, please make sure your seatbelt is fastened. To fasten, insert the metal tip into the buckle and adjust the strap so it's low and tight across your lap. To release the belt, lift the top of the buckle. Remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt sign is on. Even if the sign is off, we ask that you keep the seatbelts fastened while seated in case we encounter any turbulence. Please take the time to find the closest exit to you. Keep in mind that the exits can be located behind you. Once again, we welcome you aboard the Airport Adventures, Flight 926-2020, to anywhere you want to go. And thank you for flying the Airport Adventures. Please prepare for takeoff. Butterfly in the sky, I can go where I can go anywhere. I can be anything. I can go very high, adventure in the sky. Let your imagination take you on a ride. Now aviate your mind and soar into the sky. Let's take a look and read the book and activate your mind. I can go anywhere. I can be anything. I can go very high, adventure in the sky.
And you're live on the RunWay. Thank you for joining us here on this platform. I'm your host, Cleus Glory Young. Once again, thank you for joining us on this platform. So if you're out there, I just want to welcome you. I'm not sure what time zone you are in, either it's morning, afternoon, evening, or night in your area. So thank you for being on such a platform where the RunWay, it is brought to you by the Airport Adventure. So once again, thank you for coming on here and being on this platform with us. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been working on this concept around the context of bullying. And it is quite interesting because what I'm looking at, even though we didn't plan it, what's been going on, especially last week, it came out as a form of what is it that we expected the show to be. And the RunWay is the concept of how we're assimilating the real airport in the manner in which we're saying, let us bring someone on the runway or a topic on the runway, just like the regular airport would do for the airplane. And then we're going to assimilate it where the airport allows the airplane to take off and go to a whole new destination. So when we look at that concept, we were like, hey, this is right and fitting for the context of what we're looking for when we're looking at bringing forth a podcast show. So for us, the RunWay represents something that we would either bring a guest or a topic on the runway and allow them to actually take off and go to a whole new destination. So this is what the Airport Adventure, the RunWay, is all about. So if you're on here and you're live with us, so one of the things that you could do if you want to engage with us, you can call us at our phone number 267-704-9294. Once again, 267-704-9294 and be a part of the engagement. Or you can actually go on one of our live stream, which is the Airport Adventure on YouTube. or you can go to the Airport Adventure on Twitch, or you can go to our LinkedIn page, which is actually Glory Young. And of course, you can also see us live on Facebook under Cleus Young. So once again, thank you for coming on this platform, the RunWay. So as I said, we started the show and literally started the show, the context of the show about a month ago. And ever since that concept of starting the show, we were on this context of dealing with the topic of bullying. So it has been a series of topics that we've been looking into in the context of bringing to the RunWay. But for us, we're saying, hey, let's start off with the bullying and how does this play off into society, where we're saying, how could we get this to go to a whole new destination? And that's how we started off on the topic of bullying. And what became very, very interesting was especially last week's show, where we're looking at it, that we started to see the correlation of not only that we're dealing with the topic of bullying, but we started to look at it, how does this play out somewhere else in your life? And this is quite interesting. So two aspects around this interesting aspect, right? So the first was looking at it and saying, hey, let's bring this to the show where we're able to take this and bring this to a whole new destination. So that was the interesting part, one of them. And the second component now is looking at the correlation and saying, how does this correlate to your life? So last week, we were actually talking about the different solutions that we saw that were benefited in the context of saying, this is what we were dealing with years ago under the contingency of dealing with bullying, either from a theatrical production, a TV show, professional development for teachers and staff. We did plays as well. And also we did a different, what we would call workshop or different activities. And when we did these things, we realized that people had the same thing in the common area of wherever we went. And the common area where we went, either a school, a church, or even different parts in the community, when we brought something there, they all had the commonality where they were saying, you know what, this is a little bit different. So that's how we ended up looking at it and saying, you know what, this would be the perfect aspect where we're bringing something to the RunWay and then allow it to take off and go to a whole new destination. It's been about, this is our what, fourth or fifth topic, or fifth week on the topic of bullying, where we're looking at it and saying each week we were giving you a different section. So last week we were particularly talking about what is called the solution. So we gave different solutions around such concept. And I know one of the solutions that we talked about was actually the context of the first aspect, that if you're dealing with something and you don't know how to really structure it and operate it in a manner where you can find a solution in it, then what you have to do, find some type of expert. So this was one of the solutions that we gave, where we were saying, hey, find some type of expert to really help you. And not only just in this topic, like anything else that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with something and it's challenging for you, if you can't deal with it and find the solutions for yourself, then what you're going to do, you're going to find an expert. And this correlates to, say you're home and something goes wrong with your plumbing and the house starts to leak all over with water. And it's like, hey, you don't know how to rectify it. What you're going to do, you're going to reach out to a plumber to come in and fix the problem. So that's the same thing with social issues. The first aspect that you look at it, if you can tackle it and find solution to resolve it, then the first aspect is to actually find someone who is an expert and deal with it from that manner. So that's one of the solutions that we gave. Another solution that we looked at was something that was very significant. And we talked about it from the angle of how do you view either the victim or the bully. because the way you view, especially the bully, that's how you're actually going to treat that person. So we were looking at it saying, hey, if we're talking about a bully, you're talking about someone who is exhibiting some type of aggressive behavior. And this is the aggression that's actually coming out of the person through that behavior of being aggressive. So when you look at it now, we started to look at the different components of different behaviors and knowing that, hey, this is how this arrived at that level of aggression. And that is now what is now coming out of the person and going into the victim. So what we looked at in that context was saying, you know what, this is not a bad person, or this is not a evil person, or this is not a gangster person. This was someone who actually had what is called the built up tension inside of them, or some people will say built up emotion. So when whatever happened to that person, it built up to the context of where you can say to that person, now you're exhibiting what was built up inside of you. And this is called the aggressive behavior. So for us, it's like, hey, if you look at this person as someone mean or someone gangster or someone bad, then that's the way you're going to treat the person. What we looked at it from the context of saying this is a behavior that was built up. So in order for us to help rectify this and find solutions around it, we're looking at the behavior and not so much as the person. So that was one of the things that we gave as a solution. Another thing that we talked about was also understanding that a person sometimes miss something that they didn't get in their life, starting out in life. And then what happened now, that tends to build up over the years. That is now what we would also look at and saying, just like the regular behavior, how it moves from passive to assertive to aggressive, then that's how this plays out now. When something is missing in the person's life, then it now get to a point where the person grows up and then now is acting out of that, what we would call physiological needs are not being met, or that is what is missing from the person's life. So when we look at that, we also looked at it that this is one of the things that we're looking at as the solution, that if we can find things to fit in their lives to replace the missing or the empty space that has been there for years, then chances are we can help to rectify the situation. So that was another solution. Dealing with the airport, of course, we talked about the airport, and the prime example of what the airport does is actually bring people to a whole new destination. So when we looked at that too, way back, we saw that as an avenue that if we get some of these people who are exhibiting this type of behavior to a whole new destination, as in where is it that they're trying to get to in life? And this is how I was able to see this as a possible solution. So dealing with several children before, I asked them the prime question, hey, if you had the opportunity to get to where you need to get to, which is to accomplish your dream in life, would you be doing this right now? And the typical answer that they said was no. So when you look at that, it was like, all right, because you didn't get to do this, then you started to do this, which is now an havoc for someone else or even for yourself in society. So when we looked at that, was saying to ourselves that, hey, we want to get to the point where we can actually get to what is called the destination of the person. So this right here, and right now we got to take in, we have a caller that's coming in. So let's see who is live calling in. You're on the RunWay. This is Cleus, your host.
Hey, how you doing? I really like the show. I've seen it about 2 or 3 times. I just wanted to call and just show my support and just speak about like a situation that I had with bullying when I was younger.
All right, welcome to the RunWay. And your name?
My name is
Your name is
Chad.
Ted. Oh, welcome,
No.
Ted.
No, like Chad.
Oh, Chad. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, no problem. How are you doing today, Chad?
I'm doing pretty good. The day just started. The day's ahead. My little nephew has a birthday today, and I just look at these kids and I know that they grew up, like way different. And every parent says that, but these kids grew up in a different time where, like when I was growing up and I got bullied, like there was no kind of social media or pages or any kind of or organization to prevent it. So it's kind of like we had to grow up and just fight, like bully or like fight or get bullied, one of the two. And now
Yes.
these kids, like they're more protected.
So,
And I think that's better. But then on the flip side of the coin, I don't think that it quite gives them that fierce side because you don't have to kind of defend yourself now.
mm,
So I think there's pros and cons to both sides. Somebody wants to be bullied, of course. But then on the flip side, it's kind of like, and I think you're around my age. Like we were kind of tough back then. And I think that this generation's not really as tough as we were because they don't really have to. You know what I mean?
so, and that's quite interesting because today we're actually going to be talking about the impact of bullying in different ways. And I think that's speaking to what you're actually saying about how we grew up and how we had to tough it out. So it's something that we're actually going to be talking about later on in the show, where this episode is around the impact itself. And as you said, it's a totally different generation. Um, but for me, what I'm looking at, which is why we created a platform like this, where we're saying, let's have some deep conversation around the context of what it really is versus what it's not. And I know a part of it that you were mentioning that we grew up being tough. And it's funny because we had to deal with a child one time, and this child was acting tough in the classroom, right?
Right.
And they expressed like this, saying that the child was being a bully, right? And what we realized wasn't really that the child was being a bully, right? Even though it was what you would call a thin line between bully and being tough. This was someone that we found out later on that in order for her to get attention with her classmates, she had to pretend to be tough and mean.
Oh.
So look
Right.
what happened now. Someone had talked to her and saying to her now, this is how the person found out that going home with the person and having conversation with the person in the home and seeing what's going on. In the home, the mom talked to the child just like that to get their attention. So the child thought that this is the way I get my friend's attention. I have to be tough. So the child went to school and the child was being tough and was being mean to the other students, hoping to get their attention, right? But in the context of it, this is what she learned at home.
At home.
Yes.
And that's really interesting because now in a situation like that, they're taught like that at home. So then, the mom teaching them, well, the mom teaching her, that's how you communicate to people. That's how you get attention from your friends. But then you go to school and then the teachers are telling you that's not correct. Your mom is teaching you wrong.
Wrong.
So then the parents kind of lose power because now it's like, okay, so you're telling me don't listen to my mom or don't follow because right or wrong, our parents teach us everything. And we believe it's all right.
So
because we're impressionable and we don't really have, the aptitude to make decisions for ourselves at that age. So that's what's normal to us. But like you said, I never thought about that. That's a very interesting point you made that, she's leading by example and her example is her mother. And then, like you can't have the teachers go against the parents and the parents go against the teachers because everybody's trying to work in cahoots to educate that child, but everybody just have a different school of thought.
See, and this is why we're having a conversation like this and having a platform like this. Because for me, like being that I dealt with bullying and I've studied it and explored it beyond just the regular context, that's how we were able to identify that this child that was exhibiting what would call the bullying behavior wasn't exhibiting the real context of bullying. It was just something that, you know what, I'm home, this is all, and before I even get into this, right? So this wasn't something that the mom taught her of how to go out and get attention. What happened was this is what she saw her mom did. And it made her believe now, have that belief that this is how, guess what? I'm going to garner some attention when I go outside. Because here's it that I'm home and I'm hearing my mom calling me B, the B word, right?
Right.
And it's like now doing it in an aggressive manner. And it's like, oh, that's when we, the children, attend to her. Because I guess if you just say, hey, I guess if say her name is Brianna, hey, Brianna, come here and do this, like she wouldn't come and do it. So when she saw that her mom and with her siblings, the way her mom articulated getting their attention, right? She saw that as something that, oh, this is how you get someone's attention. So now she goes to the school and she exhibit what she saw, not what her mom really taught her. And this, what I'm saying, this actually goes across the lines with now parents. You have to understand, you may not be a teacher as in that person that's in the classroom, but the things that you're doing, the things that you're saying, the things that you're exemplifying in the home, it's almost like a teaching component because the child is in your environment and they're picking up these things. And these things now they're going to bring to the classroom and they're going to exemplify. So it's quite interesting of what goes on in the home and how that actually plays out in the classroom.
In the classroom. But I don't think that you can ever really control it because so many people are so different and they might, like you said, teach one way and act a different way. And, you know, the kids could either listen to what they teach in the classroom or what the parent explicitly says or watch what the parent does and then, you know, translate that behavior when they go to school. But everybody's so different, like what's the right way of parenting or what's the right way to conduct yourself? Because everybody, like every kid's not going to conduct themselves the same way. Like the way that I look at it is like some of us, like kids, you know, that are from impoverished neighborhoods.
Yes.
We grow up having to, you know, walk outside with a grin on our face or mean mug or angry because, you know, there's wolves in these areas and they sense weakness. So you kind of have to make a fake face and act like you're tough just to make it home sometimes in these kind of neighborhoods. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you don't know when to turn it off. So now you go to school, that thing mentality is like survival mode. I don't want nobody to pick on me, so let me put let me put on these airs to act like I'm tough or make myself look tough so nobody picks on me. And then somebody might interpret that to be like you're bullying, like, oh, this guy's looking at me mean all day and he's hurting my feelings. He's a bully. But he's not really that. He's just trying to survive. You know what I mean?
There you go. So, and that's what we're talking about. This is why we're bringing such a topic to the runway so people can really understand that. And when you just express that, right, most people out there are not aware of that. So here's it that the child comes to school, right, in like a protective mode. Because this is what I see in my environment. It's like I have to build up that toughness now to get through my environment. And by the time you go to school, you don't have the capacity to de-escalate that and bring it back to normal. You have to continue now to say, hey, I'm going to be tough in this classroom. And then guess what now? When I heard you said it clearly, it's like this person is now looked at as a bully or someone that's mean. But when you look at it, it's not a person that's actually a bully, but someone who has to put on this guard now to get through their community. And by the time they reach school, they're actually still exhibiting that. So that's something interesting that you just brought to, and this is the platform to bring things like this so people could really understand it. Our children are facing a different times, right?
Right.
Today, there's so many things going on, especially in this pandemic. So it's almost like you're looking at it where we have to put on that shield just to protect ourselves. But is that really who we are? No, we're just wearing that shield and it's like through that protection. Funny enough, where are you calling from, Chad?
the Philadelphia area.
Oh, okay. So you're in Philadelphia as well. So you should know about this context, even what's going on here in the city. Like the higher crime and violence rate is like this is now forcing people to act a certain way when they go into the community. And it's not like this is who they want to be, but it's like, hey, if you just watch the news and you saw that this person was murdered, especially in your community, it's almost like I got to be now that tough person that goes out in the street to protect my own life.
Exactly.
Mm.
When you're in certain neighborhoods, but then, like Philly. So if you go to, I don't know, West Philly or
Oh, yeah.
yeah, like areas like that, you have to put the guard all the way up. But then if you go to Bucks County, you don't have to put that guard all the way up because you're in a whole different environment, and those threats aren't the same.
So
I don't want to turn it into like a white or black thing.
No,
But it's kind of like, like in the white areas, you don't have to have the same survival tactics that you do in a lot of the black communities. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like,
so I'm glad you're saying that because couple months ago, I actually gave my godmom a ride downtown to do something. And it so happened we had to go across Rittenhouse Square. You know that area?
yeah.
Okay, so my godmom lives in the Northeast, and we had to go down to Rittenhouse Square, that area. And I kid you not, my godmom has been living here for so long, and she have never seen certain type of people live such a lifestyle. When we went down to Rittenhouse Square, and what she saw was that there were people outside on the street and even some in the street, and they blocked it off in a certain way. And here's it that they're on the street and they're enjoying fine wine and fine dining. And she started to look at it and say, wow, I didn't know that this happened in Philadelphia. Like they're not even worried about no crime or nothing. And it's quite interesting because this is what you're saying, like depending on what part of the city you are, then it's either you're going to be worried about a crime, or when you are at another part of the city, you're enjoying life at the best at your ability.
Exactly. It's all about demographics.
So that is something interesting, but thank you so much for really bringing that concept to life, because what happened, this is the platform where we're having these conversations where we're showing people now. And the interesting part that you brought up was saying, listen, here is it that a person has to go through the neighborhood to get to school and they have to put on a guard, right?
Right.
And here's what now, that is what is called a protective layer. So I have to protect myself as a human beings. We all have these protective layers that we put on, right?
Right.
Compared to now, if someone else was listening to the show in the previous sessions that we have talked about, we talked about it where we were saying that a bully is someone who expresses an aggressive behavior, right? Not someone who puts on a protective coat. You're talking about someone who you're saying something happened in their life where it was passive, which is the behavior. Then it moved from what is passive to now what is called assertive. And then it moved from assertive to now what is called aggressive. And when it gets to that aggressive state, anything that's too much for the body, which is that aggression, it has to be excreted. So when you look at that now, the interesting point that you brought the point to say this is the protective shield that someone has to put on to go through their neighborhood. And it so happens that these individuals may express these things when they're in the classroom. So the difference between that now is someone who has to put on a protective layer compared to someone who something has built up inside of them and it naturally impacts them, which is called a trigger. So at some point, something is going to trigger you now to get that aggression out. And here's how simple it is that you can really understand this, right? When you drink too much water, what automatically happens to the body? It sends you to the bathroom, right? To do number one.
Right.
because that's too much water, and you go through the process of what is called excretion. So that's the same thing now when too much aggression is now inside the body, something is going to trigger that body to bring that that aggression out.
Out. Right.
Which is the difference now between someone who gets up every day and said, hey, I'm in this mean environment, where just as we were talking about with the young lady, she was in this mean environment where she had to now be tough when she goes into the classroom. That is the part that you were expressing about the protective code. So I have to protect myself and I have to act this way, which means now I'm being mean, but it's not intentional. It's the protective mean, which has nothing to do with the aggressive behavior of a bully. Do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
All right. So I want to thank you so much for really bringing that point out so people could really understand this context of what's going on in our society, that people often associate bullying with protective coding.
And there's a difference, and they just don't know that there's a difference because they group them as one.
Thank you. And this is what we've been talking about on the show, where we're showing people now that there's a thin line between aggressive behavior compared to now what is called the protective code. Which one is like you're bringing something on the outside, like I gotta make my face up like I'm tough, right? Just to walk through this neighborhood. Compared to now emotionally, like I'm being built up with this energy inside of me that is like really tearing me apart. And at some point, I have to now bring it out into the community, which means wherever I'm going now and someone triggers me, then this is what is going to come out, which is almost like a soda. If you take a soda in a can, right, and you shake it up, that's like building it up into that aggression. Some point when you open up that soda, it's going to spill out, right?
Right.
And that's the same concept we look at with bullying. It's built up and somewhere along the line, something is going to trigger it and it's going to come out. And it's typically when you look at a bully and a victim, you're looking at someone who actually picks on someone who is at a lesser value. So typically the trigger is finding someone that you can express this aggression on. And it's not going to be someone as tough as you. Because in reality, you're like, oh, this person could beat me. But it's like, I have to pick on someone that's actually weaker. So I actually get that aggression out on that person.
Right, exactly.
So thank you so much for bringing that out. And hopefully those who are out there and listening to this, they can really get an idea of what this is really about. And the thin line between those who are wearing what is called a protective code comparing to someone who is exhibiting an aggressive behavior that was built up inside the person. Any final words you want to share with the audience?
No, that's about it. I actually have to go back to work, but I really like this show. I just wanted to call in really fast and touch base and connect and learn and teach at the same time.
And that's what it's all about, man. So thank you so much, Chad, for bringing in. And for those who are out there, Chad just brought something interesting to the platform, and it's a platform where he's showing you that people wear protective clothing while they're going out through their neighborhood. And this now, when they go to that actual destination, which could be either the playground or the school or the church or the mosque or somewhere, then this now protective coding is now being exhibited in that area as well. So thank you so much, Chad.
And thank you as well, and I appreciate it. And I'll be listening, and I'll call back in soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right. And that was our caller, Chad, calling in from Philadelphia. And Chad just brought an interesting concept to the platform. And this is what it's all about, where we're talking about the difference between those who exhibit what is called an aggressive behavior, which is something that was built up inside of them over a time period, compared to now someone who lives in a certain neighborhood or dwells in a certain home. And then what happened now, that person now has to go through a process where they have to put on a protective shield just to go throughout the community or their day-to-day engagement that they're engaging with within society. So once again, thank you so much, Chad. As we continue and we're talking about this is a topic that really needs to come to the forefront so people could really understand what's going on. And Chad just made a valid point of that protective shield. So as we're talking about today's show, we're talking about the impact. So last week we were talking about the solutions. This week we wanted to talk about the impact. And this is one of the impacts that actually happens. Like people have to walk around with that protective shield just to protect themselves, because as human beings, we have that protective mechanism to say, hey, this is coming after me and I need to find a way to protect myself. So it's funny enough, right? Let's go back to last week's session where we were talking about the solutions. And one of the solutions that we talked about was the view. So look at it now. This person who wears a protective coat actually views the community as something unsafe. So now it's almost like I have to now dress up myself from a physical standpoint on the outer layer to now walk around acting like I'm tough. Why? Because I need to protect myself. But all of that is just based on how the person view their environment. So they're wearing this protective coat based on the concept of saying that this is how I view this particular community, or this is how I view this particular home, or this is how I view this particular school or church or different religious entities or the playground or the library. Like wherever our children are going, it's like, how do they view those environments? Because the way they view their environments, that's how they're going to treat that environment. And that is the same concept we were saying with the view context of how you view that bully. That's the way you're going to actually treat that bully. So this was something that's interesting that we're bringing to this platform, and we're saying this is what we want people to understand. There's a thin line between those who are wearing the protective coating versus those who have something built up into them, which is called the aggressive behavior. So this is something interesting. And as we look at it for today's show that we're talking about the impact of it, we're talking about the impact now, and we're going to get into the impact of showing you now how this begins to now play out into our community. So when we're dealing with the context of bullying, this has a severe impact on not only just the victim, right, who is often in that predicament where we're saying, hey, let's get them some help. So the first context of it is like, oh, let's get the victim some help, and not looking at also the one that's perpetrating that behavior to the victim. So we're looking at it and we're saying, hey, when it comes to the act of bullying, we're looking at it now in today's show. How does it impact you? Like overall, how does it impact us overall? So when I started to look at the impact now, I started to see the impact from 3 different angles. And the first angle is directly, right? Something can impact us directly. The second angle is what I would call indirectly. And then the third angle now is what I would call subliminal. And I'm going to go through all 3 of them. There's different ways that things can impact us. And if I continue to do all the ways that things could impact us, I'll be on here all day and all night. So for today, I just want to do it from 3 angles. The first one is directly. The second one is indirectly. And then the third one is now the subliminal impact. So this for me as a topic that I've dived into over the years, I started to see the context of how things have the same patterns, even though they're not in the same field. And back then, I went back to school and I achieved a degree in human services and psychology, which actually helped me to now start to understand behaviors. So one of the things that we had to do as a human service major, we had to study different systems. So systems that were locally, nationally, and globally. So system could be the educational system. So that could be one of the systems that we study. The religious system, the political system. So these were systems that we studied in the context of human services, right? So one of the things that I saw, if I didn't learn anything from college, I learned this, that what happened to some of these systems that are in a different parts of the world, they're actually assimilated and then brought to somewhere else. So what I saw was that the welfare system that's being used over here in America actually came from England. So it's the same welfare system, it's just it was modified and brought over here in America, and then now it fits the criteria to America. And this is something that you also should pay attention to, because even here in America, if you notice anything about the mail truck, right? The one that brings the mail to us, that's a different steering compared to the regular car. So when you look at that, the mail system over here, right, is coming from somewhere else, because when you look at the vehicles, like the vehicles are actually different. They have their steering on a different side. When you go to certain Caribbean islands or certain European countries, you'll see that the steering is on the same side as the mail vehicle. So you can actually see that is actually coming from somewhere else. So you may look at it and saying, you know what, let me get this mail right here, this mail van, and you're driving it here in America, but you would never know that, hey, this is coming from somewhere else. And why am I talking about that? Because this was one of the things that I learned, that things may look different, but there's some way, shape, or form connected. So when I looked at it now, I'm saying, all right, let's talk about the impact of bullying. Some of the things are connected in the context of something else in your life, even though we're talking about bullying. And this was one of the things that we talked about in last week's show. We talked about the context of how the word sin and the word and the swastika sign, how they actually share the same similarity of what was done to the word bully. As we talked about it, then these three entities, the word sin, the swastika sign, and the word bully, all came from something positive. In today's society, they all looked at as something negative. But when we looked at it, we're saying now, these are things that came from somewhere else. And now we're living in them and they're impacting us in a certain way. So when I looked at it now, this is what I'm saying. We saw it from where we can say, hey, let's talk about the direct impact of bullying. And for me, when I looked at it from the bully itself, I looked at it and I said, you know what? This person is impacted emotionally. So when you look at a person, when they're dealing with some type of aggressive behavior, it's looking at that person where this person is like emotionally impacted. And this is a direct effect. So once your emotions are impacted, then it starts to now play on what is called your spirit. So your spirit then goes into play and takes over your physical body. And this is relevant to understanding how what you would call alcohol, or the other name for alcohol, which is called spirit, how it actually works on you. So it's like you drink the alcohol and now you're feeling type of tipsy. And before you know it, if you drink too much, then you're now into a different person, which means that the spirit has taken over your body. Now, from a physical standpoint, you start to actually do certain things that you would never do because now the spirit has taken over your body. So when you look at it, that's the same context of a bully. Directly, it emotionally impacts the person. And this now affects the person's spirit. Once the spirit takes over your body, you start to do things physically that you would not normally not do on a regular emotional context. And you can actually take some people who have exemplified that bullying context, and you could talk to them and see now, like, get them to go away from that bullying state and have a deep conversation with them. And some of them may not even recall what they have done to the victim, because it's almost like the spirit took over their body for them to act this way. So that's part of it, how we saw that from a direct standpoint, the emotions of the bully are impacted, which then impacts what is called the spirit. And then if the spirit is impacted, then now this happens to be something that now physically plays out in your life. And this was quite interesting. Here's why it was quite interesting back then. Because I saw it that the school was what you call an academic system, right? When you're dealing with someone who has what is called an aggressive behavior, you're talking about someone who the spirit has taken over. So you're talking about it from a spiritual context, right? The way you act, the way you do certain things, right? This is now coming out of the spirit. So when we looked at that, I was like, all right, how is it that we're asking the academic system or the academic field to really solve the spiritual problem? So this was one of the things that we saw, is like, hey, here is it that teachers are trained to academically portray this type of lesson. When you're dealing with something like this that a bully is exhibiting, you're talking about something that the person is spiritually going through. So when you look at that now, you're talking about the religious system is the system. And why am I saying this? Because the religious system deals with the spirit. So when you're talking about the aggressive behavior, you really need those who are in the religious field to help to deal with this context. So when I looked at that, I was like, wow, from an academic standpoint, yes, this is where it's exhibiting. And you have what is called counselors and therapists and stuff like that to deal with these issues. But you're really talking about something that's spiritual. And it's like, this is how we really fine-tune solutions around this. When we exhibit certain type of behavior on a day-to-day basis, it's almost like the spirit has taken us over. And then we go to a whole nother level in expressing these things into society. So that was something that I looked at, saying that, you know what, from an emotional standpoint, it affects the spirit. Whatever affects the spirit, then it later on impact what is called the physical context of who we are. So from a bully standpoint, I saw that the impact is emotional, spiritual, and then physical. From a victim standpoint, I saw that it was like, hey, when someone is expressing something on you, it actually impacts you from a physical standpoint. So it's almost like a reverse. So from a physical standpoint, someone is expressing something to you, then what happens now, that impacts your actual spiritual component of who you are. And if your spiritual component of who you are is being impacted, then that's going to go down to what is called your emotional context. So now it starts to play on your emotion. So when you look at it, it's almost like a reverse. So from a indirect impact, you're talking about from an emotional standpoint, from a bully, to the spiritual standpoint, to the physical standpoint, where this is now being expressed, And then on the other end of the victim, now you're saying it's being expressed from the physical context, which impacts the spirit. And then some point it starts to now affect our emotion. So now you're looking at a person now who is a victim who would have what is called an emotional problem based on what was physically done to the person. So that's how we looked at it from a standpoint of saying, from a direct standpoint, you're talking about the victim or the bully. This is how it plays out. And now when you look at even for a bystander, we looked at it that, you know what, sometimes it's someone that's standing by and they visually see these things. So from a visual standpoint, they see what's going on. And at some point that will start to affect your spirit, depending on how long you see it. And if it affects your spirit, then at some point you're gonna be impacted from an emotional standpoint. So when we looked at that now from a direct standpoint, if we talk about the three entities that are involved in the process of bullying, the bully, the victim, and the bystander, we can see that, you know what, the bully is impacted from an emotional standpoint to a spiritual standpoint to the last step, which is the physical standpoint. And the physical standpoint is where the person begins to express this type of aggression outward. If it's being expressed outward, then it has to be collected by someone or something. So for the victim standpoint, now it affects the person from a physical standpoint. It impacts the person's spirit. And once it impacts the person's spirit, it now goes to now impacting the person's emotional well-being. And then now from the last person, the bystander, you look and you're standing there and you're seeing this is going on in whatever circumstance that you're in, then you're seeing how it actually impacts you from a visual standpoint. Then it starts to affect your spirit, depending on how long you actually see this. And at some point, it will start to play out in your emotion. So this is how we looked at it, that from a direct standpoint, this is how it actually plays out in society. From an indirect standpoint, we're looking at it now indirectly. As I said earlier, I was in a school system dealing with human services, and we had to study system from a local level, national level, or even a global level. So when I looked at it from an indirect standpoint, if the issue becomes a social issue for the entire country, right? At some point, that is going to be brought to what is called the government. So when you look at it now from an indirect standpoint, you're saying, you know what, hey, I've never been bullied before, or I'd never had to deal with this thing before, so it doesn't impact me. And I'm sharing this because I remember when I used to heavily be involved with dealing with this process of bullying in the community. And when I went to certain people, they were like, hey, you know what? I've never been bullied before. Um, I don't have any children and I'm not dealing with that. So that doesn't impact me. And I looked at it and I'm like, wow, you don't have the contingency to really understand that this goes beyond just the direct impact. So the indirect part of it that I'm looking at now, that some people may look at it and say, you know what? Bullying doesn't impact me. It doesn't impact you directly, but it impacts you indirectly or subliminally. So here's the indirect part. If you're part of a country or an island or a continent and you live there, if this becomes a social issue that's plaguing the country, continent, or island, then it's going to indirectly affect you. And how does this indirectly affect you? So if it's impacting the country, continent, or island, then it has to be addressed by the government. If the government begins to address it now, typically it's almost like a financial resource that's created. A financial resource that's created to say, hey, we're going to fund these programs in the communities to actually help deal with this social issue. So here's how it will indirectly affect you. So the government allot certain amount of money for the country or the continent or the island. If there's a huge social issue around the contingency of the process of bullying, then what's going to happen is that some of that funding that may be directed to somewhere else may have to now go to this social issue. So from an indirect standpoint, money has to now be allocated to this social issue. So it is placed in what is called the budget, the government's budget, right? The other aspect of that now, if it's not taken out of something else and placed in the budget, then what happened now, you have what is called a tax. So I remember here in Philadelphia, they were trying to deal with something with the school, and it's like, hey, we're going to raise sugar tax. And then what happened now, there's a raise in sugar tax because they wanted money to deal with this issue that the school was facing. So when we looked at that, we were saying now from an indirect standpoint, you can either find it where it's going to be a part of the government's budget to deal with this, meaning that something else in there, in that budget, may have lost some type of monetary context, meaning that, you know what, they're looking at it and saying, you know, over here, we spent $1 million last year, we gave $1 million, and guess what? It didn't go out to where we utilize $1 million. So we can may say take $500,000 out and put over here because we have a bigger issue over here. So when you look at that, that's how a part of the budget is created. Or as I said, the other aspect of it is where we're talking about the tax. We can create a tax in the community and then the people pay for the tax once they pay for this product or services, right? And then now that actually is what you would call the indirect impact of bullying. So when we looked at this context, we were like, hey, these are two ways that people can be impacted directly or the indirect way, meaning that you have never dealt with the circumstance, right? But it's coming out of your pocket some way, shape, or form. So it's indirectly impacting you. And then the last one that we talked about is what we would call the subliminal impact. And the subliminal impact of this now is a little bit long. So what we're going to be doing, we're just going to be coming to an end with the show today, right? But what we're going to be doing next week, we're going to be talking about the subliminal impact of bullying. And this is where we're looking at it from a standpoint of saying, how does this visually impact you? Like, have you ever seen someone being bullied before? Or have you ever seen it on the news before? So it's like, if you have seen it somewhere, shape, or form, there's what is called the subliminal impact. So we're going to be talking about that on next week's show, right? And also, if you're looking at it from what is called the visual impact, you all also have to look at what is called the auditory impact, meaning that have you ever heard it before? Have you ever heard about the context of bullying? And next week's show, we're going to show you how this subliminally impact you either visually or auditory. So these are things that you may not understand, that from a subliminal standpoint, these things impact you, even though you may not be dealing with the issue itself. So we're going to be talking about that for next week. But for this show, we just wanted to come on here and begin to talk about the impact. And I want to thank our caller that called in earlier, Chad, and brought a point out where he was talking about the context of what we would call the guard building. The guard building is where you're protecting yourself just to survive in your home or your community or some type of environment. And then you put on this protective coating just to now represent yourself, which is not your true person. So again, thank you so much, Chad, for calling in and bringing that point. If you're out there, this is the RunWay. brought to you by the Airport Adventure. And we're going to come to a close with the show now. But for next week, we're going to be talking about the subliminal impact of bullying around the visual and auditory impact. And we also have an experiment that we're going to show you. And something real interesting we're going to share with you to make you understand that this person is acting out of impact and not who that person truly is. So until next week, we'll see you again. The RunWay brought to you by the Airport Adventure. Thank you and God bless.